Joining me now is the Secretary of State for International Trade, Liz Truss, who is responsible for flying the post-Brexit flags and negotiating those trade deals. Good morning, Ms. Truss.
Good morning, Tom.
Thank you for being with us. Look, I want to talk to you about COVID rates, schools, and of course trade deals you're beavering away on. But first, I don't know if you've seen page one of The Sun this morning. Yet another celebrity has been caught flouting the social distancing rules and the restrictions, while everyone else knuckles down. It's Manchester City defender Benjamin Mendy. He's admitting holding a New Year's Eve party and breaking the rules by having people round to his house. This sort of behaviour has made senior doctors absolutely livid. We heard from one of them last week who said people like this have got blood on their hands. Yet, time and time again, they're on front pages, they say they're very sorry, they might pay their club a small fine, and that's it. Would you like to see people like this prosecuted once and for all?
Well, clearly, in order to get COVID down, we all have a role to play and we all need to follow the rules. And I'm sure that's being followed up by the authorities.
Right. My question to you was, would you like those authorities to actually prosecute those people? Because there's fury out there about these people seemingly getting away willy-nilly with flouting the rules, killing people.
My understanding is that is being done and that is happening.
Okay, you don't sound overwhelmingly keen on that.
The law needs to apply to everybody equally, regardless of whether you're a celebrity or not. Absolutely.
Let's talk about primary schools then. As you know, the National Education Union and others want primary school teachers to stay away from schools tomorrow. You are asking primary school teachers to go back to schools tomorrow, and most of them, apart from those in particular areas of London, the high need areas, should be open. What should primary school teachers do then? Should they defy the unions and turn up to work tomorrow morning? What's your message to them?
I think it's very important teachers go to school. Schools are safe. Teachers have done a fantastic job at making them safe, at putting the right provisions in place. And we know how vital education is for children and how vital it is for closing the gap between the rich and the poor. And only this morning we saw Amanda Spielman, who's the chairman of Ofsted, saying that it's absolutely vital that we keep schools open. So I'd strongly encourage teachers to go to their schools, for parents to send their children to school where schools are open, because it's vital that we don't allow children's life chances to be any further damaged as a result of COVID.
On the other side of that, though, of course, is SAGE's advice, which has been published, I'm sure you've read, that the R rate is unlikely to come down below 1 with this new, very dangerous, rapidly spreading variant, while all schools remain open, primary schools included. So how can schools ever really safely reopen in Tier 4 areas or indeed Tier 3 areas when it means that R rate is going to be pushed above 1 if they do?
Well, we have had to take difficult decisions, for example, in London about schools as a result of this new COVID variant. But we need to limit the amount of schools that are closed to the absolute minimum, because the effect is so difficult when children can't attend school. And there are additional measures we're bringing in, such as lateral flow testing in schools, to make sure schools are as safe as possible. But I think it's our duty as a government to protect the next generation and to make sure that where possible, we do keep those schools open.
Despite the fact that that will still keep the R rate above 1?
Well, the guidance to schools has worked very closely with the health authorities. That's why the decision, regrettably, had to be taken for London. But my view and the government's view is we should keep it an absolute minimum. We should do all we can to keep schools safe, whether that's the measures already in place, whether that's lateral flow testing. But this is a very, very tricky issue. It's a very tricky time for the country. But I think we would really regret closing any more schools than we absolutely have to, because of the impact it has on children and parents.
Of course, we saw a significant U-turn from the Education Secretary, another one, on Friday night, when he told all primary schools in London that they should indeed close this week coming, having just said earlier that they shouldn't. Mucking around with parents like this, giving them just 48 hours to rearrange their lives, because they're going to have to stay at home now and look after the kids they can't send to school. Does it actually instill faith in what the government's doing, does it?
We have to all recognise that this is a rapidly changing situation. And the alternative to making decisions rapidly, which is what the government has had to do, is to end up closing schools or other facilities for longer than we absolutely have to. And I think it's better to seek to keep schools open because we know how important it is, and if necessary, make changes in a relatively short time frame than the alternative, which is keeping schools closed, which as I've already said, is very, very damaging.
Okay. Can you talk to parents of secondary school children then? Their schools are closed for at least another week. Can you give those parents a reassurance that those secondary schools will open by mid-January, by the 11th of January, or by the 18th of January, depending on the area?
Absolutely, that's what we are seeking to do. I have to say, Tom, I'm a parent of secondary school children myself, so I know the challenges of making sure your children are keeping in touch with online learning, and we want to get those schools open. That's where we're putting in place the lateral testing provisions, and it's very, very important period in children's education. So absolutely, we want to get those schools open.
Great, that's a guarantee. Secondary schools are going to reopen on the 11th.
On the 11th and not on the 18th for some students.
For some students. Parents are very pleased to hear that. Are there other things you can do in schools, primary schools or secondary schools, to make them safer? For example, asking all pupils to wear masks wherever they can go, maybe?
We are constantly reviewing the evidence and reviewing the guidance to make sure things are as safe as possible. And I'm sure if there is advice to do that, we will make the decision in due course. But the guidance is being constantly updated. We have huge teams of people working on this. I want to praise teachers for the brilliant job they've done at keeping lessons going online, keeping the schools open, which has been extremely challenging. I don't think anyone would deny it. And these problems that we're facing are not just problems for the UK. This is a global problem. Many other Western European countries are facing the same issues. And I think our schools are dealing very well with this very difficult situation.
Let's move on to the virus itself. Sir John Bell, the very well-known Oxford immunologist who we've spoken to on the programme this morning, you'll hear that a little later on. He told us he's extremely worried about the South Africa variant of the virus, not the Kent one, which is infecting so many people at the moment, but the South African, which is worse. He also says that we may well need a new vaccine for that because the current ones simply are not strong enough to take control of it. Presumably the government is very worried about the South Africa variant too.
I'm sure we're looking at all of those issues and the efficacy of the vaccine. I think it's a huge achievement that we've been able to vaccinate 1 million people, which is more than any other European country. But of course, we need to keep up with the latest science and latest information.
Okay, we'll watch that space, I think, rather nervously. We've also had details this morning of the government's mass vaccination programme with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine now online. What is the latest on how many people you can confidently vaccinate a week if you have those supplies through?
Well, we know, as the Prime Minister's just said on the Marsh show, that we have 530,000 of those vaccines ready to go from tomorrow. That process is ramping up, but we don't have a detailed layout of the numbers as yet.
Well, the good news from Sir John Bell is an extra 450,000 AstraZeneca vials are arriving tomorrow as well. So that takes it near 1 million. What I'm asking is, AstraZeneca are confident, they've said so, they can get the numbers to you of at least 2 million vaccinations a week. Can you vaccinate 2 million people a week?
Well, we are working flat out to get those vaccinations out. Of course, every batch of vaccines needs to be checked and approved. We've got over 700 centres across the country. A further 100 are going to be rolled out. And we are going to get these vaccines out as rapidly as we can within, of course, the safety guidelines.
Okay, you can't say 2 million a week then. That might disappoint some people.
I can't make any definitive promises at this stage, but I can assure you we're working flat out to get these vaccines in place.
Okay, and Ben Wallace offered the Defence Secretary offered the Health Secretary the use of thousands of combat medics last week. Would you like to see army teams come in and speed up that process of vaccination?
Well, the army has been extremely helpful already in helping us tackle this crisis. And of course, they will be deployed where they are needed.
Let's move on to your beat then, trade deals, international trade deals. The UK, I believe, tell me if I've got my numbers right, has now signed trade deals with 63 countries. Can you tell me how many of those countries aren't just EU rollover deals?
So 62 of those deals are rollovers of the existing deals. They're worth over 200 billion pounds in terms of trade. And if you recall, people said we wouldn't be able to do that. They said that a deal struck with the 28 countries of the EU, we wouldn't be able to replicate that as a single country. But what we've done on every single one of those deals is protected the terms of UK exporters, so we have the same access to those 63 markets. And in the case of Japan, which is the largest or one of the largest of those deals, we struck a deal that goes above and beyond what the EU was able to do in areas like data and digital, in areas like creative industries, and in areas like food and drink. So we have shown that we are prepared to take a more forward-leaning and a more innovative approach with the EU than the EU.
So, what is the biggest major new trade deal we're going to sign? Can you give us a date? There are some you're looking at. Obviously, the US one drags on a bit. TPP, the Trans-Pacific Free Trade Area, is one I know you're looking at closely. When are we going to get a biggie over the line?
So the US deal, we've already achieved agreement on the majority of text in the majority of chapters. So we are in a very strong position on the US. We're also made huge progress with Australia and New Zealand. So I'd expect them to be coming over the line fairly soon. And as you mentioned, we're also applying to be part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a group of 11 countries, £9 trillion worth of GDP. And we want to go through the accession process for that this year as well. So that would enable us to have a cat's cradle of trade deals around the world, covering the vast majority of UK trade in really deep and comprehensive deals, particularly specialising in areas like services and digital, where the UK is a leading player. And I think we've got an opportunity to be a global hub for digital and services trade.
Let's move on quickly because we haven't got huge amounts of time left with you, sadly. Your equality brief, of course, you're the Equalities Minister. You gave a pretty controversial speech last month in an attempt to redefine the brief away from what you call the focus on fashionable issues such as race and gender towards equality of opportunity, levelling up, the great mantra of the government. Have the issues of race and gender been over-obsessed about in your view?
I think we've got to recognise that the UK has made fantastic progress in terms of reducing levels of sexism and racism. Of course, they still exist, and of course, we still need to tackle discrimination in the workplace. We need to tackle discrimination on the shop floor. What I'm worried about is that the scourge of geographic inequality has become neglected. And we need to make sure that, as well as addressing racism and sexism, we are talking about the differences between North and South. We are talking about issues of, whether people are prevented from getting a job because of their accent or their background, as well as their race or sex. And I think the problem has been that we've had this kind of identity politics that is focused on the group you're in rather than your talents and aptitudes as an individual. And I think we need to get back to talking about equality on the basis of stopping people being discriminated against, regardless of their gender, regardless of their race, regardless of their sexuality, or where they're from in the country as well.
Okay. You also attacked unconscious bias training in your speech. You think it does nothing to make the workplace fundamentally fairer. Why did you say that?
Well, there's a lot of evidence that it simply doesn't work. And I think the issue with techniques like unconscious bias training is rather than addressing the root causes of unfairness in the workplace, they're instead trying to change people's behaviour. And it's been shown that the training doesn't actually work. What we need are things like more transparency. We need clearer routes for progression in the workplace so we can have a more meritocratic workplace. Those are the types of techniques that work. And unconscious bias training, I think, is a waste of time and money.
Liz Truss, it's Gloria here. A couple of questions from me after listening to your interview with Tom on schools, if I may. The National Education Union have told their members that they have a legal right not to go to school if they don't believe it to be safe. You accept that that's their legal right, don't you?
I would be very clear that schools are safe. We've done a huge amount to make sure that those safety provisions are in place. So I don't agree with the assessment that schools aren't safe.
And on lateral flow testing, clearly very important to keeping those schools open. Who's going to do them?
Well, those are being organised, my understanding is, through public health and through the schools directly. And the test kits are being sent out, so those tests can be underway.
Ms. Truss, thank you for joining us this morning. Final question, where do you fly to next?
I'm hoping to go to India very shortly, because that will be a big focus for trade
With the Prime Minister?
this year.
He's going at the end of the month.
Probably not at the same time as him, but I'll certainly be going shortly.
You're going to do the groundwork for him. Liz Truss, the International Trade Secretary, thank you for joining us.